carry me back to old Virginia. Carry me back to old Virginia.
The Sea Venture passengers and crew were now shipwrecked on the mysterious Isle of Devils. But what happened to the rest of the fleet sailing to Virginia in 1609? Would John Smith be able to ready the colony to face another round of severe summer months, followed by punishing winter weather? Would John Smith even be around for the winter? While the Sea Venture survivors were busying themselves with setting up camp on Bermuda, the rest of the surviving ships were putting themselves back into order. Many were injured and some were lost, and all were shaken up. But none had time really to focus upon personal issues. They had to pull together to fix their damaged vessels, or they'd still all die. Furious work did the job as leaks were found and patched, masts were repaired, and sails were mended. Next, individual captains established lookouts in order to find other surviving vessels. Soon enough, 4 of the surviving ships, the Blessing, Lion, Falcon, and Unity, spotted one another, and reformed a much smaller fleet. All of the passengers were sorely injured, but they all had to find strength to journey onward. In the case of the Unity, only 10 of the original 70 passengers were not ill or dead, and only 3 of those 10 could operate the ship. But other than being greatly shaken, battered, and bruised, the ships were in a state of dark confusion. Where was the Sea Venture? Did it sink? What about the other ships? Were they lost too? Should we break off course and head southward to the Indies? Or should we hope for the best and make our way to Virginia anyway? They chose to sail to Virginia. Perhaps the other ships would meet them there, but if not, then they feared the worst. The final 2 ships, the Swallow and the Diamond, did not find the other 4 ships, but they did find each other and convoyed into Virginia behind the rest a few days after the first 4 arrived at the mouth of the James River. From Jamestown's perspective, who were these ships? Were they Spanish? John Smith and company were taking no chances and had prepared their defenses just in case another Spanish ship had neared the river entrance, as had happened a few weeks earlier. But Smith's men found that these ships were English, and they were moored at Jamestown on August 11, 1609. Excitement colored the atmosphere until the colonists saw how battered the newcomers were. After hearing the stories about their transatlantic adventure, all began fearing the worst, that the Sea Venture, and with it hopes for a colonial restructuring, were lost. Further, it quickly became apparent that the 6 arriving ships only brought more people, about 400 more. A daunting number, especially in light of the fact that the supplies to aid and feed the existing, as well as the new colonists, were on the Sea Venture. Jamestown simply did not have enough necessary provisions to support a population increase, let alone the original colonists already in place. The newcomers realized this and were horrified. They figured out that they were all sold a lie, a very deadly lie, as they would find out in the coming months. The soon-ending summer was as drought-plagued as previous summers had been. Add to the drought the increasingly strained Indian relations because of Smith's recent dealings, and that made food even more scarce, which made the coming weeks very dire indeed. But food was the furthest issue from the minds of people like John Ratcliffe, Gabriel Archer, John Martin, George Percy, and their followers. They came back to pursue a vendetta with John Smith. Thus, the colony quickly descended into chaos. They reasoned that Smith's time was up, and they were right, in fact, but they had no way to prove their case as long as the Sea Venture was lost. Smith, understandably, fought against their claims vehemently.
He certainly wasn't going to resign his post because his rivals said to do so. Besides, who would take over while everyone was waiting for Thomas Gates' arrival? Them? Absolutely not. Smith reasoned that he was the best, or only man, for the job.
After all, since he took over the colony's leadership, it had improved. Goods were being produced, food was being obtained and raised, houses were built, defenses were strengthened, or expanded as in the case of Smith's fort directly across from Jamestown. Bottom line, the colony wasn't perfect, but it was in better shape under Smith than it would have been under any of the complaining gentlemen. But the quarrel raged on, and it did as much damage to Jamestown as the Sea Venture's untimely shipwreck would do. Instead of preparing for what would be a certainly brutal winter, the colonists did nothing productive while their leaders squabbled. All Smith could reason to do was physically separate the colonists, who were already figuratively separated. Thus, Smith could remove opposition as well as those who still refused to work. He sent 140 settlers under Gabriel Archer and Francis West, Lord Delaware's younger brother, to the falls at James River, where present-day Richmond stands. Another 60 were ferried down to Nansemond, near present-day Suffolk, under John Martin and George Percy. Both moves, though perhaps reasonable in Smith's eyes, proved to be debacles. The Nansemond tribe wanted nothing to do with the English. They wouldn't trade, they would cede no land, and messengers who were dispatched to negotiate were, quote, sacrificed and their brains were cut and scraped out of their heads with mussel shells. This infuriated the English, who came ashore, drove the Nansemonds from their land, burned their homes, vandalized their holy places, took hostages, and shot one of the chief's sons, though the son somehow escaped alive. Further action stopped when George Percy and John Martin disagreed concerning what to do with the Indians' corn supply. Martin would not venture further in order to take the much-needed food. He didn't want to endanger his few men. George Percy relented and decided to return to Jamestown in order to resume fighting with John Smith. Francis West's group suffered mostly because West would not listen to Smith's well-informed expertise. Smith had worked out a deal in which he had purchased a Powhatan village from Parahunt, one of Powhatan's sons, in which the young Henry Spelman was traded for the land soon dubbed Nonsuch, after Henry VIII's and now Queen Elizabeth's elegant palace. West thought a different location better suited his needs. That being the case, he pursued plans that involved building a fort further south of modern-day Richmond. But before too long, Powhatan's warriors swooped down, killed many, and destroyed the would-be settlement. It was at this time that Smith, always unlucky when sailing on Virginia's rivers, ran aground and had to return to West's settlement. Upon arrival, Smith found about a dozen Indians assaulting the newly arrived settlers. He beat them back and in so doing won over the opinion in that the settlers agreed to move to the town purchased from Parahunt. During the 2 days that Smith moved the settlers to Nonsuch, news arrived at Jamestown about the Indian attack. Francis West, who had come back to Jamestown, heard the news and sped upriver to survey the situation. But he found no settlers. They were not at his chosen location, which infuriated the captain. He ordered the settlers back to his location at West Fort, which they obediently did. That's when it happened. Smith, very angry, reboarded his previously run-aground boat and started to make the trip downriver. He was sleeping on deck when an explosion erupted. Smith shot up and quickly realized that the explosion happened to him. His powder bag, which was typically worn on the waist, was mysteriously lit. The subsequent conflagration tore into his thighs, ripping the flesh in a 9 to 10 inch radius from his groin area. The pained captain jumped screaming into the river to squash the flames. When he was eventually fished from the river, he was nearly unconscious, though still writhing in severe pain. Smith was not given any treatment, suffered the remainder of the 60-mile return journey to Jamestown, and was bedridden the remainder of his time in Virginia, while his conspirators still plotted against him. No one can say with any certainty what happened to Smith's powder bag. Was it a freak accident, or was it deliberate? History simply does not have a recorded answer, though many theories abound. Smith certainly believed that it was deliberate, especially as he later wrote that his enemies tried to finish him off while he lay in pain. Apparently, however, the would-be murderers, William Dyer and Thomas Coe, acquiesced at the last moment. Regardless, Smith's presidency was over, and he knew it. He needed a doctor, and for that, he had to return home. To rub salt in Smith's serious wound, John Ratcliffe sent a message with the ship carrying Smith back to England in October 1609 that stated, quote, "This man is sent home to answer some misdemeanors whereof I am persuaded he can scarcely clear himself from great imputation of blame." The message aptly sums up the accusations hurled against the incapacitated captain. Smith was hated by a powerful group, and he would suffer more for it. He would have to defend himself for tireless actions that helped the colonies survive, in spite of the many foolish decisions made by people who didn't know how to live in the wild. Ratcliffe, Archer, and Martin's pompous arrogance seemed to have won the day. But did it really? Soon after John Smith relinquished his command, the newly self-appointed council elected George Percy to be the colony's next president. But Percy was no John Smith, and Jamestown would soon find that out in the harshest way possible. I greatly appreciate your continued support in sharing the Virginia History Podcast. Please continue to spread the word and help this small colony to grow. Follow us on your favorite podcast provider, like us on Facebook, and visit the website. If you feel that I've done an adequate job, please consider supporting the podcast on Patreon. Links can be found on the website, or one can visit the campaign at patreon.com/VAHISPod to see the offers listed. Please join me next time when we will illustrate the darkest days of Jamestown's existence, the period known to history as the Starving Time.
Mas